immunology. Okay, let's see what happens here. Slides are visible, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, if you see, this is the basic transplantation immunology. Actually, what happens, the immune protection against foreign antigen in human relies on a coordinated response of both innate as well as adaptive immune system. You know all these things, right? So the innate system comprising of anatomical barriers like skin, phagocytic cells like macrophages, and soluble compounds such as complements, interferons, those provide an efficient initial defense against foreign antigens such as donor antigen in solid organ transplantation or in case of stem cell transplantation. But this response lacks specificity, and in this context adaptive immunity comes into play. So in contrast, subsequent adaptive immunity response has the ability to create a large diversity of antigen specific responses upon antigenic challenge to the host, with the development of immunological memory consequent on subsequent exposure to the same antigen. Now this response, this adaptive immunity, involves predominantly lymphocytes and antibodies, and it's characteristically more intense, more specific, leading to a more rapid elimination of the foreign antigen. So this is the basic implantation immunology, or you can say this is the basic immunological scheme, depending on which or that actually helps us, that actually works in a concerted fashion between this innate immunity, adaptive immunity, or between these different armor of this innate and adaptive immunity, and by this concerted fashion they actually work together to defend or to boost the immunity of normal healthy human cells, right? So if you see, this is the stimulus, that is the donor derived MHC peptide. Say what happens when a particular donor cell or the HLA mismatched donor cell that enters into our body, here the DC or dendritic cells first comes into play. DC or the dendritic cells are specifically a group of heterogeneous population of professional antigen presenting cells, and that can initiate primary immune responses, and hence they have the ability to regulate both innate as well as adaptive immune responses. Now what happens, precursor DC molecules or precursor dendritic cells, those arising from bone marrow progenitor cells, enters into the tissues as immature dendritic cells with superior phagocytic capabilities. Now as it enters, it encounters foreign antigens such as donor antigens during transplantation. It also comes into contact with bacteria, tumor antigens, resulting in the secretion of different cytokines, for example IFN, and activation of natural killer cells, mentioned here as NK cells. Now macrophages and as well as eosinophils. Now following antigen capture and processing, these dendritic cells undergo maturation and migrate to secondary lymphoid tissues, where they present processed antigens or coupled processed antigens. So now these antigens are coupled with MHC molecules, major histocompatibility complex, to T cells. It allows for the selection and the expansion of antigen specific cluster designation, CD4 plus T helper cells. Now these CD4 plus T helper cells subsequently amplify the immune responses by regulating antigen specific, you can say about CD8 plus cytotoxic T cells, B cells, those are immune specific, antigen specific immune response cells, and antigen non-specific like macrophages, natural killer cells, eosinophils, effector cells. So basically this is the molecular mechanism that actually occurs during this donor derived MHC peptide comes into the patient's body. Now, so in our last class we have talked about these HLA or MHC molecules. So we have discussed that MHC class 1 antigen, that it contains HLA-A, HLA-B and HLA-C in human, and MHC class 2 that contains HLA-DR, DQ and DP in humans, different loci. They are highly polymorphic cell membrane polypeptide chain. Now most cells express MHC class 1 molecules, and MHC class 2 molecules in contrast have a tissue specific regulation of their expressions, and their constitutive expression is practically restricted to APCs, antigen presenting cells, but also to endothelial cells. Now the most stem cells express low MHC1 but not class 2 MHC molecules. It brought the idea of those being immune privileged. So what happens, the finding suggests about this MHC molecule, there are experiments which suggested that even if these cells initially lack the expression of immune relevant molecules such as MHC2, these may express these molecules upon their administration in vivo in case of stem cells. Now the stem cells operate within a microenvironment when they are reinserted into our body. They operate within a microenvironment where these interact with stromal cells, growth factors or extracellular matrix proteins, and also face a variety of pro-inflammatory cytokines such as interferon gamma, tumor necrosis factor alpha, IFN gamma, TNF alpha. Now this microenvironment and its elements together or independently can modulate the expression of these MHC molecules on these cells. When used in cell therapy, the stem cells are to be expanded in vitro, often in medium supplemented with different growth factors, which modifies the expression of several molecules. Just remember, I don't know whether you remember or not, during in our second or third class we have talked that before the transplantation process we need to modulate, we need to program the stem cells in vitro cautiously. So this is the reason. And also again we have also talked that the modulation, the reprogram or the programming of the stem cells should not be in such a way that their normal growth, normal development will be hampered, right? Now human, we talked about mesenchymal stem cells. In case of human mesenchymal stem cells expanded in vitro in the presence of fibroblast growth factor FGF, while retaining the conventional properties of mesenchymal stem cells such as immunosuppression and multilineage differentiation, also express functional HLA-DR molecule and can present antigen. Now if simulation is done, simulation with IFN gamma is the major regulator of MHC class 2, expression failed to induce the expression of HLA class 2 on human embryonic stem cells. However, evidence exists for the epigenetic control of these MHC class 2 and antigen processing molecules in human ECS, that is embryonic stem cells, and induced pluripotent stem cells also. So there are different epigenetic regulation. Do you know what is epigenetic regulation? Epigenetic regulation is the regulation which is beyond genetic material. There are different process like histone modification, including acetylation, deacetylation, methylation, demethylation of these molecules, and that actually results in the expression or the switch on or switch off of that particular gene. So this epigenetic regulation is very much important in this context of biological samples, in the context of protein expression. So this epigenetic analysis showed that the regulatory regions of this class 2 transactivated gene and HLA-DR gene are methylated in these cells, that is in the stem cells, and treatment with epigenetic agents restores both the expression of this HLA-2 and its induction by IF and gamma. It was also observed that this IF and gamma reduces, it actually helps to induce the HLA-2 expression only in the cardiac stem cells, that is maintained under hypoxic conditions and not under standard conditions. So it seems clear today that these stem cells and their derived tissues express HLA-1 and can similarly to nearly all other cell types be induced to express HLA-2 after transplantation when exposed to inflammatory cytokines or other microenvironment factors, particularly during an intercurrent infection. Though less is known concerning the expression of non-classical MHC molecule MHC1 like HLA-E, HLA-G, and MHC class 1 related antigens like MICA, MICB, etc. on these stem cells. However, some evidences indicates that these mesenchymal stem cells also constitutively express HLA-G, which is an unconventional MHC class 1 molecule HLA-G, and a functional role for this constitutive expression in mediating mesenchymal stem cell immunosuppressive effect on T cell activation, proliferation, or natural killer cell and T cell mediated cytotoxicity is there. Now both these non-classical and classical MHC1 molecules and MHC class 1 molecule related antigens might be an important issue for future consideration during this stem cell transplantation process. And obviously this non-MHC immunogenetics may also have an additional impact on the fate of these stem cells. So it's basically the molecular crosstalks between these different immunological substances or immunological molecules that continuously occurs during this transplantation process. So at each and every step that we have discussed earlier, that we should be careful enough before transplantation. Transplantation itself a very costly treatment process. So if you are going for this transplantation process, you need to think of your pocket, obviously, and again you have to think about the consequences that can occur after this stem cell transplantation process. So you have to think. Now the question comes that we are talking about these HLA molecules. So what happens actually in case of these HLA molecule? This is basically what I am going to tell you now, basically the recapitulation of our last class, that we have talked about alloreaction. These alloreactive anti-HLA antibodies, those are generated by the transfusion organ or cell transplantation process. Now viral infections and vaccines can also induce a resurgence of this anti-HLA antibody that actually causing the GVHD. Now viral infections and vaccines can also induce. Now it is therefore likely that many potential recipients of this stem cell therapy will have pre-existing anti-HLA antibodies already inside the patient's body. Okay. Now if donor specific, these antibodies may affect the stem cell in several ways. Now if cytotoxic, this will limit the regenerative potential of the infused stem cells that will not be able to regenerate these infused stem cells. Alternatively, this may modify the biology of the stem cells through their signaling capacity. HLA antibodies are capable of inducing proliferation, maturation, or even apoptosis of different cells depending on their type and stage of differentiation. So what is the use, what is the effect of this transplantation process? If it is actually these HLA antibodies modifying that infused stem cells, this illustrates the possibilities that anti-HLA antibodies can exert a detrimental as well as a beneficial effect in stem cell therapy. Why? It is likely that a significant proportion of recipients would receive at the best partially HLA mismatched stem cell derived graft given the necessity of off-the-shelf cells, therefore minimizing the risk while optimizing the benefit is mandatory for ultimate efficient regenerative therapy. What is an acceptable mismatching, and how much risk is allowed, and how much prophylactic immune protection is required? This is still not known. I have mentioned earlier that there are cases like you are watching this or you have made the experiment in vitro, but when you are going to make it in vivo, there are differences. If you are using an animal system to check the effect of this transplantation process, the immunological effect of this transplantation process in an animal, you have experimented. But when you are using a human model, the effect may be somewhat different or may be deviated from what you have observed before in animal system. So in every cases, the acceptable mismatch, how much the risk is allowed, and how much this prophylactic immune protection is required, that is need to be investigated again and again. Now in case of human, the transplantation, one approach to reduce this graft immunogenicity is to minimize allogenic differences between the donor as well as between the recipient by HLA matching. Now ultimately what is desired? Zero HLA A, HLA B, HLA DR, HLA DQ mismatch during this transplantation process. Even without considering the existence of other important histocompatibility loci, this is extremely difficult to achieve this. Why? It is basically the recapitulation of our last class. So Bibhash, I guess, can answer this, that I am telling that we are considering all these things, okay, but the existence of this, about this important histocompatibility loci, it is difficult, extremely difficult for us to achieve this 100% match. Why? Why we cannot have a fully matched donor? Vibhash?
This is known as allogeny recognition.
Yes, but why? Why this is happening? If you are a patient and you are searching for a donor, we are thinking of best match, okay, but we can never ever get this 100% match. Why? This is what we want, that zero HLA A, HLA B, HLA DR, DQ mismatch, but this is not originally happening because of this MHC molecules have the particular features of polymorphism, right? The MHC molecules are major histocompatibility complexes being highly polymorphic in nature and highly polygenic in nature. This is extremely difficult to achieve this expected matching. Now in this context of stem cell therapy, it is apparent that it would be similarly difficult. However, reducing HLA mismatching by choosing the least immunogenic combination can now be achieved by banking stem cells. I have also mentioned two different processes, or just named two different processes by which you can check this HLA mismatch, right, in my last class. Now when we are talking about these HLA molecule, we have already mentioned about these MHC1 and MHC2 molecules, that you know this MHC1 molecule consists of two polypeptide chains, as you can see from the figures. A larger chain, which is A chain, encoded on chromosome 6 in the MHC region. I have showed the picture in my previous class, right? And a smaller beta 2 microglobulin encoded on chromosome 15. Now the class 1 A chain consists of a single polypeptide composed of 3 extracellular domains. Can you see them? They are alpha 1, alpha 2 and alpha 3. A transmembrane region that anchors it in the plasma membrane, and a short intracytoplasmic tail it contains. And the beta 2 microglobulin consists of a single non-polymorphic molecule, non-covalently bound to the alpha chain, and is encoded on chromosome 15. Now this alpha 1 and alpha 2 domain, as you can see, they fold together into a single structure consisting of two segmented alpha helices lying on a sheet of 8 antiparallel beta strands. This is clear from this figure. Now the folding of this alpha 1 and alpha 2 domains create a long cleft or groove where actually the antigen or the peptide comes and bind. This is the site at which peptide antigen bind to the MHC1 molecules. And now once this MHC class 1 molecule is bound to this peptide molecule, now these are presented to the CD8 lymphocytes. So what is the type of the antigen that MHC class 1 present? I told it in my last class also. Anusha, Bibhash.
Ma'am, can you repeat the question?
The MHC class 1 and class 2 molecules basically binds to the peptides or the antigens, okay, and represent them. So these MHC molecules represent which kind of antigen they generally bind. MHC class 1 molecules. What kind of antigens they process? I have told that is between this alpha 1 and alpha 2 domain, there is a cleft or groove where the antigenic peptide comes and sit. Okay, so what is the nature of this particular antigenic peptide? Well, let me tell you, they actually process endogenous peptides. This MHC molecule has the ability to differentiate between these self and non-self molecules, and is MHC class 1 molecules, they process and they binds with these endogenous antigens. So what are these endogenous antigens? The examples can include misfolded proteins, that is already inside our cells, the misfolded proteins, and pathogen derived peptides, those are processed by proteasome. So what happens? This complex of proteases typically generates peptides of 4 to 20 amino acids with a hydrophobic carboxy terminus. After
Ma'am,
yes,
Ma'am, is this the exogenous pathway?
This is endogenous pathway.
Oh, I'm sorry. And
I will come to this exogenous pathway just after this. So what happens after trimming of the peptide by these cytosolic proteases, the antigenic peptides are translocated to the endoplasmic reticulum or ER by the transporters associated with antigen processing. Transporters are mentioned here as TAP1 and TAP2 molecules. Next, meanwhile, a new MHC1 molecule is being synthesized in the endoplasmic reticulum. Now, the new MHC1 molecule associates with the MHC1 peptide loading complex. Tapacin physically links the MHC1 molecules and the TAP transporters. Here you can see, I guess, tapacin is here. That actually helps to bind this MHC1 molecule with the transporter. So directly from this proteasome, these peptides are incorporated by this transporter, incorporated into this ER, where these MHC1 molecules are synthesized. Now tapacin actually physically helps to link the MHC1 molecule and the TAP transporter. As the peptide enters from the cytosol, the cleft of the class 1 molecule receives it. This is the cleft. So this cleft actually, they actually receive this peptide, and the peptide bound MHC molecule dissociates from the peptide loading complex. It is then dissociated, you can see here, and is recruited to the cell surface. Next question to you all. So what kind of cells are these MHC molecules are expressed? I have told that it is recruited to the cell surface. So MHC molecules are expressed or recruited on what type of cell surface?
ma'am, CD4.
That is the receptor T cell.
CD8, ma'am.
Oh,
CD4.
T cell
receptor CD4, but in the MHC is expressed in the cell surface of any kind of nucleated cells. This is any kind of nucleated cell, and it is actually expressing its MHC bound with the particular antigen. It is expressing in the surface of a nucleated cell, and then it will go and bind to the CD8 plus receptors. So what happens? This complex machinery has several quality control steps, such as MHC1 molecules that fail to assemble properly, they are degraded, and ultimately what happens, this peptide presented on MHC1 molecule will stimulate a CD8 T cell response that will go and bind to this activated CD8 plus T cells. They bind, they actually allow these MHC bound with these antigens, they actually go and interact with those TCRs or T cell receptors, which are expressed on the surface of these CD8 plus T cells. They will go and interact with these TCRs, and upon interaction between these T cell receptor or TCRs and these MHC molecules bound with the antigen, that will actually, along with different co-stimulatory molecules, that actually initiate, or they actually stimulate the CD8 plus T cells. Okay, so this is the endogenous pathway, how this MHC1 molecule works. Now in case of MHC2 molecule, it consists of two polypeptide chains, alpha and beta, both encoded in the MHC2 region on chromosome 6 and non-covalently linked to one another. Now these alpha and the beta chains each consists of two extracellular domains referred to as alpha 1 and alpha 2, and beta 1 and beta 2 respectively. And similar to MHC1 alpha chain, the alpha and beta chains of MHC2 molecule also consists of a transmembrane segment. You can see this is actually seen on the surface of the APCs. Here I have written these MHC class 1 molecules are expressed on the surface of nucleated cells, and these class 2 molecules are expressed on the antigen presenting cells. Now all of these class 2 molecules consists of, also it contains a transmembrane segment and also a cytoplasmic tail. Now what happens, the extracellular membrane proximal alpha 2 and beta 2 domains are homologous to immunoglobulin constant domains. The crystallographic structure of MHC2 molecules showed that it is folded very much like MHC1 molecules. Now if you know that different structures of these MHC class 1 and MHC class 2 molecules, and you can see that here alpha 1 and beta 1, these two subunits basically form the groove where the peptides or processed antigen comes and bind, right? Now if you consider the structural differences and how it is imparting an effect on the function of both of these MHC molecules, then we can say that the major difference between these two MHC molecules lies at the ends of their peptide binding cleft. This cleft is more open in MHC2 molecules compared with MHC1 molecule. The MHC2 molecule cleft is made up of a non-covalent association between the alpha 1 and beta 1 domains, and that binds the peptide through multiple van der Waals forces and hydrogen bonds. So what happens as a result, or the main consequence of this difference, this structural difference or the difference for this groove structure, is that the ends of a peptide bound to an MHC1 molecules that are buried within the molecule, whereas the end of the peptide which is bound to MHC class 2 molecules, they are not buried. This difference allows more flexibility in the length and the type of peptides that MHC2 molecules can bind. Peptides that bind a specific class 2 molecules will share the same middle anchor residues but may vary in length and sequences of other residues. So the initial main anchoring residue, that will be same, but in case of MHC class 2 molecules, the length may vary because of the free end of the peptide which is not buried inside the groove or the pocket of this MHC class 2 molecule, right? So just now briefly discuss about the mechanism of work or the how these MHC class 2 molecules work. Like in the same, they actually process the exogenous antigens, but the process of processing these antigens, that is quite different. So bacterial proteins, that are cleaved by proteases, cathepsins, metalloproteases in the acid environment of the endocytic pathway, and meanwhile the MHC class 2 molecules assemble in the endoplasmic reticulum with another molecule called invariant chain. Now the newly synthesized molecules transit the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus. Now after passage of this invariant chain is cleaved by acid proteases, leaving a residual peptide referred to as the class 2 associated invariant chain peptide or clip in the MHC class 1 cleft. Now this clip occludes the MHC2 cleft and prevents peptide from loading until the molecule is in the lysosomal or late endosomal compartment containing the peptide. So you can see it has entered the late endosome. Now at this point, this HLA, we know about HLA-DM. HLA-DM molecule removes the clip from the cleft and stabilizes the molecule while the peptide is loaded onto the cleft. Next, HLA-DO comes into play. These molecules can also facilitate this process of some settings, the removal of this clip, and fully assembled and loaded MHC class II molecules then recruited to the surface and serve to stimulate predominantly CD4 plus positive T cells. You can see from the figure that once these MHC class I molecules, after the processing of these antigens, they are bound to these processed antigens via the exogenous pathway. This bound MHC antigen complex is then expressed on the surface of the APCs or antigen presenting cells, and they actually interact with those T cell receptors which are expressed on the surface of the CD4 plus T cells, and here after the interaction they actually stimulate these CD4 plus T cells. Okay, so this is the basic function of this MHC class 1 or MHC class 2 molecules, how they actually can impart the immunological, they serve the role of immunological warrior inside a human cell. Now we know about adaptive and innate immunity. In case of adaptive immunity, this is articulated by lymphocytes. More specifically, we can say initially while we started the class, we have talked about innate and adaptive immunity, which is the basic transplantation immunology. Now this adaptive immunity is articulated by different molecules, by lymphocytes, specifically B cells and T cells, which are responsible for the humoral as well as cell mediated immunity respectively. Now these B and T cells do not recognize pathogens as a whole, because we are continuously seeing that these T cells, CD4 plus T cells, CD8 plus T cells, all of these, they need the processed antigen. They need to be present, they need to see those processed antigen, and there are some carrier or there are some molecules which actually help to show them or represent them with this processed antigen, and that particular purpose is served by these MHC or HLA molecules, right? Now these B cells and T cells, they cannot recognize these pathogens as a whole, but molecular components known as antigen, they can see these antigens. Now these antigens are recognized by specific receptors present in the cell surface of B cells and T cells. Here you can see the T cell receptors are CD3, CD4, which is expressed on the CD4 plus T cells. If you remember MHC1, there are CD3, CD8, which is expressed on the CD8 plus T cells. So this antigen recognition by these receptors is required to activate B cell and T cells, but not enough, as second activation signals stemming from the activation of the innate immune system are also needed. Now the specificity of the recognition is determined by genetic recombination events that occur during lymphocyte development. We will talk about these genetic variations that actually are the genetic recombination that occurs in our next class. So the specificity of this recognition is determined by these genetic recombination events that occur during lymphocyte development, which lead to generating millions of different variants of lymphocytes in terms of the antigen recognizing receptors. Now antigen recognition by B cell and T cell, that differs greatly. the processing or the antigen recognition is not same for the B cell or T cell. Now, T cell epitope prediction aims to identify the shortest peptides within an antigen. These two pictures are very much familiar to you, I guess. Now, you can see the nucleated cells and these APCs, they are actually expressing this alpha 1, beta 1, alpha 2, beta 2 domain containing MHC1 and alpha 1, alpha 2, this should be MHC2. Okay, this is not right over here. This should be MHC2 and this should be APC and this should be nucleated. There is a problem in this picture. I guess you understood what is the problem.
Yes, ma'am.
So it should be, because alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3 and beta 2, these 4 domains are in MHC class 1, and MHC class 1 molecules can never be expressed on APCs. It is always expressed in nucleated cells. So it should be written as nucleated cells here, right? And one thing you can see from this figure, I have mentioned that in case of alpha 1, alpha 2 domain, that makes the cleft or the groove of peptide binding in MHC class 2. In this cleft, the peptide is bound in a buried manner. The free end are buried inside this groove. You can see from this figure. Another thing is the molecule is interacting, or they actually activating CD8 plus T cells by interacting with this C alpha, C beta, V alpha, V beta. This is basically the T cell receptor molecule, the variable and the constant chains of these T cell receptor molecules. And here you can see the difference or the mistake that is made in this figure over here. These alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, 4 domains are in MHC class 2. So it should be class 2, and the cells upon which, or the on the surface of the APCs, these MHC class 2 are expressed. Now you can see from this figure that I have already mentioned the peptide end of these peptides, bound peptides, are free. So you can see here only a few amino acids, they should be conserved one. They would be specific for the proper binding in this alpha 1, beta 1 domain groove, domain containing grooves. And you can see that this bound MHC peptide is interacting with the T cell receptors of CD4 T cells. So I guess you have already got this mistakes and understood. Now this T cell epitope predictions aims to identify the shortest peptides within an antigen that are able to stimulate either CD4 or CD8 cells. Now this capacity to stimulate T cells is called immunogenicity. So what is immunogenicity? The capacity to stimulate the T cells, and it is confirmed in assays requiring synthetic peptides derived from antigens, because they will not process the total pathogen or total foreign molecule. They will process a particular portion. It will present a peptide. There are many distinct peptides within antigens, and T cell prediction methods aim to identify those that are immunogenic in nature. Now, the T cell epitope immunogenicity is contingent on 3 basic steps. What are those? Those are antigen processing, first step. Second step consists of peptide binding to MHC molecules, and third one is the recognition by a cognate T cell receptor molecule. So this is the basic process of this recognition of this particular antigen and the stimulation of these T cells, that actually requires these 3 basic steps. Now, of these 3 events, the MHC peptide binding is the most selective one at determining T cell epitopes. Therefore, the prediction of this MHC peptide binding is the main basis to anticipate T cell epitopes, and that actually we will view it next. Okay, so let's talk about prediction of peptide MHC binding. So we have seen that this peptide binding to MHC molecule is the most important portion. Now MHC class 1 and class 2 molecules, if you can see, they have similar kind of 3D structures with bound peptides sitting in a groove, you can see, delineated by 2 alpha helices overlying a floor and it contains 8 antiparallel beta strands. However, there are also key difference between MHC1 and MHC2 binding groups that we must highlight, that I have already told you, that the peptide binding cleft of MHC1 molecule is closed as it is made by a single alpha chain. As a result, this MHC1 molecule can only bind to a short peptide ranging from 9 to 11 amino acids only, and whose N and C terminal ends remain pinned to conserved residues of MHC class 1 molecule through a network of hydrogen bonding. The MHC1 peptide binding groove also contains deep binding pockets with tight physicochemical preferences that facilitate binding predictions. There is a complication, however, peptides that have different sizes and bind to same MHC1 molecules often use alternative binding pockets, and therefore methods that actually predict this peptide MHC1 binding require a fixed peptide length. However, since most of these MHC1 peptide ligands, they are of 9 residues in length, it is generally preferable to predict peptides with that size. In contrast, if you can see the peptide binding groove of class 2 MHC molecule, this is open one, allowing the N and C terminal ends of a peptide to extend beyond the binding groove. As a result, the MHC2 bound peptides vary widely in length. It can be from 9 amino acids to 20 amino acid residues, although only a core of 9 residues, which is the peptide binding core, sits into the MHC class 2 binding groove. Therefore, the peptide MHC class 2 binding prediction methods often target to identify these peptide binding cores. Understood? Now, these MHC class 2 molecule binding pockets are also shallower and less demanding than those of class 1 MHC molecules. As a consequence, peptide binding prediction to MHC class 2 molecule is less accurate than that of MHC class 1 molecule. So, this is basically a problem when you are using a particular protein to predict its particular binding residue that will act as the epitope for binding with MHC molecules. So, that particular binding site prediction, that will be a problem because of the structure of this group or peptide binding site of this MHC class 1 and class 2 molecule. Now, given the relevance of the problem, there are numerous methods to predict the peptide MHC binding. They can be divided into 2 main categories. What can be they? They can be data driven approach and there can be sequence based approach. Now, this in case of this sequence based, or you can say this is sequence based, in turn structure based approach. In case of structure based approach, generally it relies on modeling the peptide MHC structure followed by evaluation of the interaction through methods such as molecular dynamic simulations. And in here, this method have the great advantage of not needing experimental data. However, they are seldom used as they are computationally intensive and exhibit lower predictive performance than data driven methods. in case of data driven methods for predicting this peptide MHC binding, they are based on peptide sequences that are known to bind to MHC molecules. Now these peptide sequences are generally available in specialized epitope databases. There are databases like IEDB, the Immune Epitope Database, APMHC, Antigen. These are databases from where you can get the peptide sequences and use them for MHC peptide binding prediction. Now these both MHC class 1 and class 2 binding peptides contain frequently occurring amino acids at particular peptide positions. I have already mentioned that in case of MHC class 2, there are 9 amino acids that must be a bit of specific so that they can go and bind completely with that groove. So there are these amino acids at particular peptide positions which actually specifically binds to the groove of these MHC class 1 and class 2 molecules. So this is known as the anchor residues. Thereby prediction of this peptide MHC binding was first approached using sequence motif or SM, reflecting amino acid preferences of these MHC molecules at anchoring positions. However, it was soon shown that non-anchor residues also contribute to the capacity of a peptide to bind to a given MHC molecule. Subsequently, researchers developed motif matrices which could evaluate the contribution of each and all peptide positions to the beginning of the MHC molecules. Now there are various T-cell epitope prediction tools available online from where you can get the idea about this prediction of this MHC and a particular peptide. T-cell epitope prediction tools, okay, like Epidoc is there. Epidoc, you can go for Motif Scan, PepVac, Epigen, Net MHC. These are a few well-known web-based servers which are available freely to check this T-cell epitope prediction. Now, among all of these softwares, we will discuss about one such freely available online software that actually helps in this T-cell epitope prediction. It acts as the T-cell epitope prediction tool, and that particular software that we are going to use, that is based on artificial neural network. It has the ability to work on artificial neural network, and that particular tool that we are going to use, that predicts quantitative binding affinity. First, quantitative binding affinity. Second, details about the super types. Third, details about the tap binding. You know what is tap? We have talked about tap proteins. So tells about the tap binding, and last but not the least, details about proteasomal cleavage also. So we are going to show that particular software. So in our next class, we will just do one hands-on. I will show you the software, how it works, and what is the basis of that particular software. Any question from today's class?